with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, July 2nd, 2020. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting multiple different kinds of steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Achin Vanaik joins us from Delhi, fellow at the Transnational Institute. He's talking with us about escalating crisis on the India-China border. What is the history behind that conflict? How does it relate to an enhanced aggressive posture in both India and China today? And what could be done to cool this conflict? Where does Pakistan fit in? Does it? All that and more. Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested, but maybe the real story in addition to her, is what the hell Bill Barr has been doing the last several months. That's what I would like to know about. A pool of sweat has formed around wherever Alan Dershowitz is isolated from his supposedly former friends. U.S. admits a direct role in the Lava Jato operation that made President Lula da Silva a political prisoner, paved the way for Bolsonaro, and targeted the left across Latin America. And in an incredible act of theft, a UK judge denies Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, access to Venezuelan gold at the Bank of England. What does he need to do in order to get the money that is his? Recognize Juan Guaido. Another 1.5 million U.S. workers file for new unemployment claims. The U.S. economy added 4.8 million jobs in June, but there are fierce headwinds coming. Speaking of workers, enormous rallies in Sao Paulo across Brazil yesterday of delivery workers and others working in the freelance temp economy demanding rights in the face of global Uberization. U.S. reports nearly 50,000 new coronavirus cases. That's another single-day record. And the virus rose 50% last month, led by Republican governors that opened up. Official U.S. Corona death toll is a substantial undercount of actual tally, according to a Yale study. The Trump administration, of course, thinks this is a good time to scale back the mandate that health insurers cover coronavirus tests. And are we moving towards another round of stimulus checks as Trump frets about re-election? All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Matt, Brendan, how are you guys?
Feeling the heat, but I'm enjoying it.
Feeling the heat, but enjoying it.
Yeah, I would feel the same way. I'm actually doing pretty okay. It's a nice chill Thursday.
Cool.
I think before, Matt, you and I need to come up with some prepared bits when Michael hands this off to us like this, because I feel like I'm off my game sometimes.
Just respond with honesty, Brendan.
Yeah, I feel like the answers are very genuine.
We're
Usually they're weather-based.
Weather-based. Exactly. That's all people need.
That's it. It's not that complicated.
How's the 10-block radius in which everyone lives in the majority report? You don't know which. We don't share.
No. God, no.
The fireworks were outside of my place last night, actually.
What are the main fireworks conspiracy theories?
I mean, I think the main sort of menacing one is that it's the cops sort of like preparing people like psychologically for something worse, which I don't know. I don't super follow that. I think if cops think that they're getting one over on us by like lighting off firecrackers, I think that's probably less menacing than things they could do. But I think it's just there's a lot that were for sale, but they're not going to be sold this year because there's a pandemic. So people are selling them.
People are selling them.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I landed on too.
I mean, there is always like, I mean, a couple of times when they've seemed like they're really close, I've stepped out to try to like get eyes on people.
Yeah, I think it is just like
just
kids.
People. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I don't know. Maybe
you have the streets completely empty too because traffic is way less. So it's a lot easier to go fire those things, to be honest.
Traffic is way less, but do you guys feel like, I feel like in New York, things are getting quasi-normal again in a way that still feels kind of weird to me.
Yes.
Especially when I read, the numbers coming in that this pandemic is like anything but going away. It's arguably intensifying. I mean, obviously it's not as bad here as it was a month ago, but still it's just as like, I guess.
There's people grasping for it.
Yeah. There's going to be a weird tension too in the city, I feel like, with people who went away in March and are coming back now and didn't have to, experience the worst of this with people who have been here the whole time. And I think people are going to be, less than understanding for people who don't treat it with the proper caution.
Less than understanding of the people who don't treat it with the proper caution. I like that. We could put that into like a forum email. Various building associations.
Send that to Robin D'Angelo.
Yeah, send that to Robin. Yeah. Well, you were out doing some ridiculous pseudoscientific HR trainings. The rest of us were on lockdown from the pandemic, damn it. Okay. I've made no secret of the fact that I think it's very important that Donald Trump be defeated. In Tuesday's interview on TMBS, Bill Fletcher Jr. and I actually talked very specifically about how some aspects of the Republican project, particularly exemplified by Mitch McConnell, Bill Barr, I would say, along with Donald Trump. But obviously, Donald Trump doesn't really have any, sort of intellectual context for this, just his own sort of impulses. That basically, I'm sorry, I was a little distracted by that. I am. You need to get Donald Trump out of office. And in some ways, I mean, everybody knows Joe Biden's record, his donors, and I think few people have any illusions about what that presidency would look like. But in some ways, because we haven't had a normal campaign, and I'm not subscribing to the Joe Biden podcast, it's actually been pretty easy to just sort of focus squarely in electoral context on the grotesqueness of Donald Trump, his administration, the pandemic, gassing protesters, threatening to put the military on the streets, terrorizing workers at meatpacking plants. But the Biden campaign felt a need in the past couple of days to put this ad out. And oh my God, is this ad disgusting?
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
I just think it's a nasty question.
You know you're a fake.
Today I have strongly recommended that we dominate the streets.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total.
So, I mean, look, the first 25 seconds of that ad is actually great in terms of what they're trying to do, which is all, again, it's just return to normal, stop the freak out, return to normal, stop the freak out, right? That's a very effective ad. But the idea that you're going to put Maduro and Castro, and who was the third person? That went by fast.
Chavez.
I mean, I will strongly defend, in many respects, Castro and Chavez. Not all respects. We can litigate, blah, blah, blah. But, and of course, Maduro is under siege. I mean, Maduro is somebody that the United States has been targeted with multiple coups, right-wing forces with assassination attempts. So it's disgusting and outrageous. I mean, let's just take Castro. Fidel Castro throws out Batista, and by extension, the mafia, because the Cuba is just like a mafia playground, right? Closes the casinos, ends prostitution, and fights against colonialism and apartheid, not only in Cuba, but actually in an incredible act of solidarity for such a small place, is sending troops to Angola and to South Africa to help in those liberation struggles. And then create literacy, healthcare, and pragmatically and systemically, deal with a variety of legacy colonial issues and social divisions on the island, along with, of course, obviously, things that we could critique. But that is the Castro record. Does kicking out the mafia, fighting colonialism, and stopping casinos sound like a Donald Trump jam to you? I mean, Hugo Chavez is an army officer who rises to power on a foundation of fighting poverty in Venezuela, which he does significantly when he's president. He does cut poverty. That's, of course, gone back because of the economic warfare against Venezuela from the U.S. and others, and some mistakes in management by the Venezuelan government. So, I mean, in such a stupid time, they're not even doing the right political compass. I don't know, on its face, that ad is obviously, it's targeted at a Spanish-speaking audience. So in some ways, it's like, you think like if you're some type of kind of like, say, like Florida hardliner, that's probably a Trump supporter. But at the same time, I do think, and this tracks with the rest of the Biden campaign, getting all this support from George W. Bush alums and everything else. I mean, that ad could be very politically effective. I would be very curious to see the polling behind that ad decision. But the idea of comparing Donald Trump to Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, or Nicolas Maduro is embarrassing, ahistorical, absolutely disgusting, and wrong by every conceivable metric. I mean, even just like Trump hiking into the sea, into the mountains of Cuba, like, I was the best revolutionary, I was the best, but I couldn't walk into the mountains. I mean, give me a fucking break. It is despicable. And just to underline, there's going to be no difference in foreign policy in Latin America with Biden. There's going to be absolutely no difference. These are the types of things, again, just as we could say, like Biden indicating he might rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. And that was in and of itself a major and actual significant difference in 2016. That's really important. But don't be under any illusions that when it comes to Latin America, the Caribbean, there will be no structural change in U.S. foreign policy and no structural change really in the Middle East.
I mean, yeah.
With regards to, except with Iran, but I'm talking Israel, Palestine, and Saudi.
And you see that with the signaling, all the news stories that came out over the last 24 hours of a huge number of former Bush 43 officials and, joining calls for Biden to be elected.
I mean, I have to say, and again, this is like what's so frustrating to me. And I'll keep reiterating, you should vote for Joe Biden to get Donald Trump out of office. And there are some sparks here and there. There is some strength in certain areas of the left. There is some great new energy in pockets of Congress, but that hasn't been taken to the national level yet. Bernie was the manifestation of that. That was beat back. And let's be really honest. I mean, the Biden campaign, I mean, this is like George W. Bush woke. And George W. Bush is woke now.
The W stands.
I mean, look. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's or I mean, more cautiously, just a desperate attempt to recreate the Obama era, which just isn't possible. in today's world. But I do think he will win. And ads like this might be effective.
This is why I said, like, you grant the voting thing, because I think it does harm to be fantastical about voting strategy.
Absolutely. I agree.
But as far as like actually using your labor to help this guy win, like, no, he's made the decision and he's been telling you from day one that he doesn't need your help. I mean, it was like, I'm left, right, or leftist socialist Biden or whatever. Remember that t-shirt he put out? Like, and he's going to win without DSA knocking doors for him. So it's like, I think I'm just fairly happy with my vote, but no labor commitment to Biden.
Yeah, and have the right analysis of it, but don't be under any delusions about it.
Exactly.
And then I think the fights that might take place are going to be in very specific areas. Like, I think there's some legacy labor institutions that he has support from, and it's going to be incumbent on them to fight like hell for NLRB appointments, or potentially who even the labor secretary is. But the overall context is that the left is still pretty weak. Biden will likely win. And I mean, what you do is you get rid of certain extremes in human suffering, like the grotesque attack on the food stamps as an example. Potential, I mean, DACA will be codified, which is very important. I don't really know if there will be a significant change, frankly, at the border. There might be some, and that's hugely important. And then besides that, the real question is just how much does democracy itself institutionally get handcuffed even more over the next 4 years? That's really the basic dividing line question, and that relates to the future viability of a left project. Anyways, that ad's fucking disgusting. Let's joining us, I guess we should go to him right now, is our guest. Is he here, guys?
He'll be joining us shortly.
Okay. He'll be joining us shortly, so he's not on quite yet.
Here we go.
I could bring him in if he's here.
Okay, should I put this up?
Yes, this is great. I'll just introduce you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Joining us now is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Achin Vanaik. He's a writer and social activist, former professor at the University of Delhi, and a Delhi-based fellow at the Transnational Institute of Amsterdam. We're discussing, among other things, a recent piece of his in Jacobin, The Escalating Crisis on the India-China Border. Achin, thank you so much for being here.
All right, pleasure to be here.
So can you give us basically just the big picture background that this border dispute between India and China goes back to at least the early 1960s, where there was previously conflict in this border region. Can you explain to us the origin of this border dispute and the geography of it? What part of the world specifically are we talking about?
Well, we're talking really about the part of India that is separated from Tibet. And the reason for the dispute, of course, is in history, in the sense that you have China becoming a semi-colony. India was a colony, and China eventually coming under communist rule and becoming independent in 1949. India becomes independent in 1947. But the way that India became independent is different from that of Vietnam and China, in the sense that China, as a semi-colony, overthrew the regimes. And Vietnam, of course, overthrew the French. In the Indian case, independence was achieved through a non-violent national liberation movement led by Gandhi, which aimed and eventually achieved a kind of transfer of power. So this transfer of power meant that India would adopt many of the policies of the former British rulers. And therefore, in a sense, it took the forward defense policy of Britain, what Britain had identified as the boundaries of British India, as its own boundaries. What this meant was that there wasn't really a willingness on the Indian part to do more of a give and take with countries like China and others. Of course, one should also recognize that we're talking about Tibet, and the Chinese, of course, took over Tibet. So you can have justifiable criticisms of the Chinese on Tibet, and you can have justifiable criticisms of India, which didn't allow, for example, the Northeast Nagaland to become independent and so on. But insofar as India accepted the suzerainty of China over Tibet, there should have been a give and take. And in fact, in 1960, there was an offer from Chou Enlai for saying that, look, we need this part, which is bordering Tibet, and the other part of India, which is bordering the east, is not really of that much concern to us. So why don't we have give and take on these lines? India refused. And then war erupted in 1962. India was defeated. And since then, there has been this burning sore in the Indian mentality among all the governments there. So that's really the background, and the opportunities to resolve it were there in 1960. They were there in 1980, in the late 1980s. They were not taken. And then, of course, you have the situation where the 90s onward, you have India having a closer and closer relationship with the United States. And, of course, you have the US-China relationship, which has had increasing problems.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Can you
elaborate? I was going to say, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
No,
go
please.
Ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Can you elaborate on the strategic, why would India, particularly in the 80s, I guess, and maybe you could explain a little bit more about this taking on of the reason that India would replicate British colonial policies with regards to its stance on borders. But beyond that, what is this region, is this a question of sort of like national pride or prestige, or is there important material resources and strategic stakes of this positioning? Like, as an example, does the Chinese occupation of Tibet offer access to water or minerals or timber? Does it give them an advantage with regard to any conflict with India? How much of these sort of claims are, what are the strategic stakes of these claims, basically?
From the Chinese point of view, and even from the Indian point of view, it's basically political. It's not as if there are tremendous resources there, and that's why they're trying to grab it. In the Chinese case, of course, the political strategic importance is the question of Tibet and Xinjiang. And since the Chinese are now building what's called the Belt Road Initiative, there is a connection to Pakistan and the establishment of what is called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. I mean, you've heard of the Belt Road Initiative, which is a huge development in which China, in order to address its economic needs, overcapacity and so on, is trying to make a kind of road and rail and infrastructure link all the way through Pakistan, and whereby it can connect on the road, on land, it can connect with Europe, and right up to the east, it can connect with Japan, and also as a maritime system and so on. So what's happening is that what India is doing along its border, the Chinese see as threatening its control over Xinjiang and Tibet, and threatening the connection between China, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Pakistan, especially since it's going through a part of a region that what at the moment belongs to Pakistan, but which India claims, because this is a leftover legacy of the partition between India and Pakistan, in which what was called the province of Jammu and Kashmir got divided, with part of it on the Pakistani side and the other part on the Indian side. So that's the material factor here. There are also other aspects, in the sense that the Chinese also want to send a message to the Indians that, look, why are you part, and we are getting extremely worried because you are part of the American design to contain us. And that, of course, is also a reality, because India, since the 1990s, has become ever closer to the United States in strategic terms. So
you talk about that relationship.
India sees China.
Can you talk about, I'm sorry, I think there's a delay between us. I apologize. But can you just elaborate on the history the Chinese U.S.-Indian alliance and how that change started to happen in the 90s, and particularly with regards to tensions between the United States and China?
Okay. Well, before the India-China War of 1962, the Americans were not happy with India because India had a kind of non-aligned policy, which basically meant that it wouldn't align with the West and it wouldn't align with the East and the Soviet Union, and would like good relations with both. Mm-hmm. In the American case, ever since the formation of the Soviet Union after the Second World War, it wanted to build alliance structures that would contain the Soviet Union and China, which became communist also. And therefore, the United States had very good military alliances with Pakistan. So given the India-Pakistan relationship, you had the Indians staying aloof from the Americans. The Indian non-aligned policy was not favored by the United States. Over a period of time, after the India-China conflict, there was the potential for India and the US to come closer together. And to some extent, they did. Mm-hmm. But then you also had 1971, the Bangladesh conflict, and the partition of Pakistan. And Pakistan was an ally of the United States, and the United States supported Pakistan and opposed the formation of Bangladesh. So that became an area of tension. You also had the Sino-Soviet conflict, and in the late 60s, 1970-71, after Kissinger's trip to Beijing, you had the US-China entente against the Soviet Union. And so you had all of these kind of situation here. So you have opposition on the strategic sense, in the sense that the Indians were unhappy about American support to China and to Pakistan, both who were seen as enemies of India. Over a period of time, in the 80s, there is improvement in the relations between India and the United States. Things change after the end of the Cold War. You have the Sino-Soviet conflict ending, right? You have India, which opens its economy, wanting to move closer to the United States. And if you like, you have a kind of triangle with India and Pakistan at two corners of this triangle, and the United States at the apex. And India saying to the United States, look, come closer to us. Why are you close to Pakistan? And Pakistan saying to the United States, remain close to us, come closer, don't get close to. And the United States saying to both of them in the 90s and thereafter, listen, you are both my spouses. I like you both. You, India, are number one spouse because you're bigger and more important. But you, Pakistan, are also number two spouse. And I'm not going to abandon either of you because I need both of you for different reasons. You, the Indians, I need for geopolitically southwards and eastwards to contain China. You, Pakistan, I need you westwards and northwards to help us vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. And I need you, Pakistan, for our geostrategic purposes vis-a-vis the North, Central Asia, Afghanistan, elsewhere. So this has been the kind of triangle in which India and Pakistan don't move closer together, but are preoccupied with their relationship with the United States. In the case of the other triangle, if you like, between China, India, and the United States, let's understand that China and Russia are basically reactive powers to the United States. That is to say, China, after it started move towards capitalism, wanted to develop, doesn't want the United States to see it as an enemy. It wants time to be able to develop and modernize and become a greater and greater power. And after the end of the Cold War, the United States foreign policy establishment, what was its attitude towards China? Its attitude towards China was that, look, China is potentially a strategic rival and a strategic opponent. But given the closer economic relationships between the two of us, there were also sections within the American establishment that were saying, well, China is also potential not a rival or an opponent. And therefore, the United States quite cleverly made preparations on both levels. It made preparations to treat the Chinese as a potential opponent and rival, and also made preparations not to treat it as such. What's happened over time with Obama's pivot to Asia and now with Trump is that the American establishment has decided China is a strategic opponent. And India being part of the containment of China, that also riles China. And India seeing China as its strategic opponent also has this problem. So you have a real downturn, a serious problem in the relations between the two. I'm sorry.
No, it's great.
I've gone on for some time.
Oh, this is perfect. This is why we wanted to interview. Can you then give us actually the same trajectory, but between Pakistan and China?
Well, in the case of Pakistan and China, for a long time, the Pakistans had all their eggs, strategic eggs, in the American basket. After all, they were an ally in the 50s and in the 60s and so on, right? In the 1965 war, the United States of America said that the 1965 war between India and Pakistan, okay? In the 1965 war between India and Pakistan, the Pakistanis got a big shock because the Americans said, we are not going to supply arms to either side. Why did this shock the Pakistanis? Pakistanis said, we have a military alliance with you. We are an ally. When we are in a situation where we need your support and arm, you're now saying that even though we're an ally, you're not giving us arms. So they began to think that they should also be more flexible and they should take advantage of the India-China bad relations because of the India-China war. So the Pakistanis explored a relationship with the Chinese. So you begin to see a situation in which, as I said, you have that triangle between the United States, Pakistan, and India. You have developments in the 70s in which the American relationship with Pakistan fluctuates, 65, and then in 71, it's a closer relationship, right? And to the 70s also. And then in the 80s, things begin to change. As you have developments that take place after the end of the Cold War, and especially after 2001, and the assault on New York and Washington, the terrorist attack, you begin to see the Americans being very much concerned about the Middle East and also how to contain, move towards some degree of containment of Russia and so on, and then its involvement in Afghanistan, the need for Pakistan there, and all sorts of, if you like, combinations that then become important to it, and how it has to deal with all of these kinds of combinations and relationships with these different countries. It needs Pakistan because of Afghanistan. It needs India because of China. How should it balance between the two?
In the situation today, let's get to what happened a couple of weeks ago and where we are now. But before we elaborate on that, let's take the personalities of Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi. And I guess I'm curious because there is this sort of top level analysis, and I think there's some truth to it, but it might not be a specific enough truth to tell us much. So there is this trend of these more sort of right-wing, nationalistic leaders. We could see it, the usual list that people mention. There's elements of this, obviously, with Trump, with Bolsonaro, with Netanyahu, Putin, and then Modi and Xi Jinping are put on that list as well. And I think in both cases for justifiable reasons. But I guess what I'm curious about, because even with some of the sort of, very significant attention-grabbing things like the extreme aggression and abuse of the Kashmiris that's taking place right now, we can situate, just like we've situated this conversation in decades-long policy, including, you said in 2 different points, 1960 and in the late 1980s, both under Congress Party leadership, where this had the potential to actually be resolved. So I guess how much of what we're seeing right now is just the kind of inevitable trajectory of policy that's been set in place for decades that hasn't been resolved versus the heightened aggression and potential recklessness of two leaders potentially striking in a more aggressive direction?
Well, one thing is that I would say that both in the case of Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi, you're talking about an escalation of an aggressive, belligerent nationalism domestically, which will have its expression to some extent even in foreign policy matters. In the Indian case, the Modi regime has always blamed the Congress party for the failure to maintain its territory and control. And its aggressive belligerentism expresses itself in saying that we are going to make a strong India, we're going to teach Pakistan a lesson, we're going to become an power which is also going to challenge China, and we should reclaim the territories that have been lost to Pakistan, and even the territories that we should at least, whether we lost to China. This is in fact a rhetoric which is much more forcefully expressed. None of this helps to improve relations or do a settlement with China. In the case of the Chinese, their reaction is that, okay, the border issue is we have got what we wanted. We could come to some agreement with the Indians, but they're getting more and more worried about the fact that the United States is becoming much, much more aggressive towards it. And the Indians are going along with it. And therefore, they also feel the need to also assert themselves. And there's also that economic dimension of the Belt Road Initiative. There's also the fact that it is an authoritarian state. And how does it gather support from its own domestic population? Certainly not on the basis of communism. It's not a communist society. It's an increasingly unequal society. It also has to be much more aggressively nationalist. Look, we're going to be a strong power. We must stand up to the United States and so on. I would say so I mean, that would be one picture. I'm tempted to make a distinction between the United States and China, which may be of interest, although it's a bit peripheral to the India-China issue.
Please, go ahead.
And that is that the United States is, if you like, the United States is, because it's an internal democracy, no matter how weak and no matter how fading, but obviously so, the United States government is always more cautious domestically, externally. The Chinese are more cautious externally and extremely aggressive internally. So look at what they're doing with Hong Kong. Look at what they're doing in Xinjiang. Look what they've done in Tibet. The American government, for all its brutalities, has to be more cautious because of the federal character of the United States. And I think this is something that's very important to understand. American foreign policy represents a much more serious and grave threat to the world order. Yes. The Russians and the Chinese are pretty bad, but they're also reactive to it. And one clear example of where this reaction is taking place is this whole question of the nuclearization of outer space, which incidentally has its knock-on effects on India and Pakistan. The Americans have decided to militarize outer space, building the ballistic missile defense shield. The Chinese and the Russians are saying we have to overburden the defense shield by building more and more and bigger bombs and more delivery systems. The Indians are saying, look, the Chinese are doing this because of the Americans, but they could turn their bombs against us. So we have to build more and more nuclear bombs. And the Pakistanis are saying, look, the Indians are doing this, and they're saying they have to do it because. So you have, from an American initiative, an escalating nuclear arms race, both in East Asia and in South Asia, which is very worrying.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the relationship between India's, the belligerent nationalism of Modi and the fact that it is sort of increasingly, China is its own distinct power. And as you say, it's a reactive power. But India is reactive to the United States. But India is sort of on one hand kind of asserting this ultra nationalism, this Hindutva vision, but also essentially just folding deeper and deeper into U.S. security interests. How is that sort of message balanced in India? And I mean, is it like in Israel? Is Trump quite popular on the right in India? I know he and Modi have a fairly close relationship. Modi seems to know how to play Trump pretty well. But how does that dynamic work out in terms of the nationalist messaging in India?
Okay. Well, first, let me say, I said Chinese in the United States, but that should not be allowed to, that should not dismiss the fact that the Chinese also behave in their own aggressive manner, independent of the United States. It's overall in the strategic sense. So I don't want to let the Chinese off the hook in any way, nor the Russians. In the case of India and USA, again, the United States sets the terms. The Indians would like to come closer, but there's that damn problem about the American relationship with Pakistan, which also makes it, and the Indians realize this. So how do they get closer to the Americans if the Americans are still going to play a game with the Pakistanis? And this is where the non-substitutable benefits that the United States gets from Pakistan and India means that you can't have a wholehearted embrace. But to the extent that India sees China as its bigger strategic rival, then it's getting closer and closer relations with the Americans. But that doesn't mean that the Americans will do what the Indians want them to do from time to time. So within the Indian establishment, you have those who say, we must move closer and closer to the Americans. And then you have others who say, well, look, to what extent are the Americans going to help us? We should pursue our own national interests, and we should be more careful about the United States, and so on. A very small element, which is almost negligible, is the one which is hostile to American imperialism and says that you should move away from being part of the Quad and you should be more independent, and so on. The dominant attitude in India is that India is a country which should be seen as a major global power. And just as China is seen as a dominant force in East Asia, why aren't we seen as a dominant force in South Asia? And the reason why we can't be seen as a dominant force in South Asia is because the Pakistanis are there. We don't have the same dominance, if you like, as that. So that's a constant irritation, a constant problem, that even in South Asia, where in terms of size, in terms of population, in terms of overall economic strength, but not in terms of military strength, it isn't dominant in the way that the Chinese are dominant over all their neighbors, of course, barring Russia, of course, in Eurasia. So you don't have the same sense. And you also don't have the same sense to the frustration of Modi and others and to all the others. India is not seen as, it's seen as an emerging power. But as a world power, as a potential world player, no, it's not that, and it's still very far from that. As for the question of Israel, there's a difference. Israel has a much closer relationship to the United States, to the extent that many in the United States say that it's the Israeli tail that wags the American dog. You can't say that about the India-US relationship. And even though I don't believe that the Israeli tail wags the American dog, the American relationship to Israel is unfortunately a very deep one. Not an India-US relationship is not at all comparable.
Absolutely.
Not to the US.
Right. I mean, the history of the Israeli relationship goes.
And incidentally, there's another dimension. Israel's positioning in the Middle East is much more important than South Asia. From a geopolitical as well as from oil, gas, and its connection to Central Asia and the Middle East as a whole, the MENA region, Middle East, North African region, is geopolitically much more important than South Asia. And the role that India can play in South Asia for the United States is not as important as the role Israel can play in the MENA region, where it's, of course, the dominant force. So geopolitically is important for the longer term thinking. Yeah.
So take us then. So a couple of weeks ago, we had this clash. I believe 20 troops was the assessment that I read in terms of Indian troops that died. I didn't know how many casualties there were on the Chinese side. This gripped everybody's attention, and the news cycle being as it is, it sort of went away, at least internationally, after about a day or two of concern. But this is obviously, this is a very tense situation in a very tense part of the world. So where are we now, a couple of weeks out? What have the responses been from India and China respectively? And where are we now, and what is the state of play, and what might come next?
Well, what seems to have happened is that the Chinese are taking control of certain areas which they did not have control of before, right? So that would seem to be the case. One, why I say seem to be the case, because you have a lot of secrecy surrounding what's happening on the Chinese very obviously, but even on the Indian side, there's been careful one doesn't get a very clear picture. But what we can see from satellite images and all is that the Chinese have some control over in the Galwan Valley area, and in another area called Pangong Su Lake, that area. They seem to have some control over there, material ground control. At the same time, discussions between the military, top military brass on both sides has led to an agreement that we should disengage our troops some 2 kilometers. Each of us go back 2 kilometers from where there's been tension. But that's it for the moment. Neither side would like a escalation. But since the border is unclarified, there are tensions, and you have a border situation in which the Chinese are stronger in certain areas and the Indians are stronger in other areas. And there's also a pressure on the Indian side to assert itself on the areas where it is stronger, if you like. So there is that temptation. 2 things. This hiatus, even this stoppage of tensions escalating and coming down to a certain extent is not going to be resolved at the military level. It will have to be done at the political, diplomatic level. That is one. Second is that the best that we can hope for is that there will be a de-escalation and there will be an uneasy relationship existing for some very considerable time. There is always the potential for some local development that nobody is in control of that can take place and then create a spark, precisely because there are overlaps in that area of what each side thinks belongs to them. And unfortunately, given the larger geostrategic situation, I don't see any serious move towards a resolution of the border issue between India and China. I think it's going to be a tension-filled situation in which there is now much greater distrust on either side. And the likelihood is that there will be a hardening of relations and that the Indians will want to move even closer, not only to the United States, but there's a lot of talk about India also expressing its support for Taiwan, being more critical of what the Chinese are doing in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and so on. And all of these will also create certain tensions. And then the Chinese will want to improve their relations with Pakistan. And that will also have its effect on India. And I've already told you about the nuclear issue and those tensions. So, and of course, what India is now doing and what Modi is now doing is talking about restricting China's economic entry into India. And it's already talked about saying that we are not going to allow the Chinese to invest, Chinese investors in. They're not to be investors in building roads. They're not to come in as investors in what are called the micro, small, and medium manufacturing industries or service industries. India is not talking about boycotting all Chinese goods because it needs a lot of Chinese electronic and also a lot of Chinese raw materials for its pharmaceuticals and so on. But there's also going to be a sort of payback on the economic side. So generally speaking, at the economic level, at the political, at the diplomatic, and at the military level, the prospects are that as compared to what the situation was before, it's going to get worse.
Final question for you. I know it's going to be very difficult to measure, maybe even impossible, debates inside the sort of Chinese diplomatic community, although obviously there are, but they're not as transparent. But to the extent you could gauge, I mean, certainly in India, is the Congress Party, is main opposition parties essentially on board for this hawkish posture of the Modi government? Or is there criticisms inside the context of domestic politics? And I mean, I'm actually curious if this applies to, sort of questions of Muslim citizenship, the assault on Kashmir. Is there any? I know that there is a strong left in India. Not a majority, obviously, but they make their voices heard, have some presence, particularly on different state levels. But is there any national level response? If I interviewed Sashi Tharoor or somebody like that, would I potentially hear something different about the Indian posture on these issues than what's coming from the Modi government?
The difference between the Congress and the Modi government on what has happened now is very much on the same plane of nationalism. They're criticizing the Modi government for being weak. And they're criticizing the Modi government for being secretive. We don't know exactly what's happening on the border, because Modi made a statement which was quite ridiculous when he said that the Chinese have not been able to enter into Indian territory. And then this was refined by the Ministry of External Affairs to say that the Chinese did come in, but they've been pushed back. And it's quite clear that from many sources that that's not the case. So they're criticizing Modi for being secretive, and they're criticizing Modi for failing. In other words, not being aggressive enough. So this is not a move, if you like, to be less jingoistic, but sharing the same platform. Yeah. In the case of the left, on the Muslim issue, on the question of, for example, the citizenship, the Congress has got some criticism of it, but not a very serious or strong criticism of the Modi. It says, okay, we want to maintain our Muslim support, but Modi is gaining ground among Hindus, and we must play the Hindu card. And more the Congress is playing the Hindu card, right? In the case of the left is critical of Modi's anti-Muslim policies. But when it comes to the China policy and the question of nationalism, unfortunately, the left does not stand out as a serious critique or very different from the Congress party or others. The left comes from a tradition which should have recognized the relevance of what Lenin said with regard to the question of the right to self-determination and the question of nationalism. What has the left said with regard to Kashmir? They're not going to support the idea that the Kashmiri people in the valley, particularly, which is the most oppressed part, should have the right to self-determination. No. But they will say we would like to restore the earlier degree of autonomy which they had, which already been eroded by the Congress party to a great extent. The Congress party says, well, you have eliminated that autonomy. We are not saying that you should restore that autonomy, but we don't like the unconstitutional manner in which you took away that autonomy. In other words, we don't like the manner, even though we don't dispute the outcome. And almost all the other opposition parties go along with that. So even on this case of the India-China issue, you don't really have a serious criticism of India's foreign policy from the left. And part of the reason is because the Indians never had a very serious criticism of India's non-aligned policy, which is better than what it is now. But it has never really come to terms with the hypocrisies of Indian foreign policy since 1947. And of course, in China, who is prepared to criticize the hypocrisies of the Chinese foreign policy? Right. Or in Russia, who's prepared to do that? But at least you can say that China is an authoritarian, non-democratic country. One would have hoped that within India, there would be much more courageous criticism of Indian foreign policies, and a much stronger willingness to attack the deceits and hypocrisies of the Indian government in its external behavior. And I can give you an account of so many things, etc. here. But then the same problem probably in the United States of America. No?
Yeah, you sound that the parallels are the Democrats are, yes, that's almost entirely it. The Democratic response is either to try to outflank or, criticize means, not ends, or, in some cases, whenever Trump completely dishonestly or sort of randomly questions some sort of militaristic component of U.S. foreign policy, which of course he'll end up doubling down on anyways. He's been an extraordinarily aggressive and militaristic president, as you noted, even with the weaponization of space and skyrocketing civilian casualties across the globe. But occasionally, if he says something, just even the last couple of days, we need to get out of Afghanistan. Well, the Democrats in the House are working to make sure that doesn't happen. So yeah, very, 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 very similar dynamic. I really appreciate your time, Achin Vanaik. Please read all of Achin's pieces in Jacobin to understand this situation, understand the Modi government, all of the dynamics in India, China, Pakistan, as well as the, of course, unfortunate and problem-causing role of the United States. Achin, thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Brendan, can I give one plug, Brendan, before you finish? Can I give one plug for a book that I've written, which has just come out in 2020?
Yes, of course. Huh? Of course. Go for it.
About the Modi government, about nationalism. I came out with a book which came out in March called Nationalist Dangers, Secular Failings, a compass for an Indian left. So Nationalist Dangers, Secular Failings. It's a book which is available by Flipkart or Amazon. And it's an analysis of the Modi government's aggressive nationalism, Hindutva nationalism, and the expansion that it has had in terms of its hegemonic influence in India. So that would be something that could give an insight into what's been happening in the Indian context.
Say the name one more time.
Nationalist Dangers, Secular Failings.
Great.
A compass for an Indian left. And so it's available with Amazon or Flipkart.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. We'll read the book.
Thank you.
Take care. All right, folks.
Okay.
Working on it.
Working on it?
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like, I think, I don't know.
You just pin Michael's video too.
That's fine. All right, folks, become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show keeps chugging along. Check out the Majority Report merch, including the masks. All of the proceeds go, the Northwest Immigration Rights Center, I believe. Hope that's the name of it. On Tuesday's TMBS, we had a great in-depth conversation with Bill Fletcher Jr. I hit on a bunch of topics you'll want to hear my view on in the post-game, including this trash right fragility book, weighed in on the right-wing populism debate, and we also talked about when Fidel Castro visited Harlem in 1995 and touched a bit on when he visited in 1960. And the conversation with Bill Fletcher Jr. on a anti-repression movement reviving labor and the stakes of 2020 through a democracy in chains lens, as well as why we need to put all of our energy into saving the post office. Go to patreon.com/TMBS. Last Sunday, illicit history of how we get to proper and full trans equity with Joanna Wiest and cultural politics of corporate America, the Supreme Court and Capitol, and how all of these issues are linked. Patreon.com/TMBS to get the whole thing. TMBS.fm. The store is restacked. Pre-sales for your dope American and union-made gear, like the Sankara t-shirt, the No Coup t-shirt. It's really fun. Snag your merch and go to redemmas.com to buy a copy of Against the Web, Cosmopolitan Answer to New Right. I dare say so myself. The thesis of that book and that cosmopolitan socialist synthesis is more important than ever as the unfortunate sort of culture war politics reamps up. There was a decent review of it in Unheard yesterday. And of course, you can subscribe to Michael Brooks' show on YouTube and iTunes. Matt, Literary Hangover, what's cooking?
Yeah, well, twitch.tv/literary hangover. A lot of good stuff going on there. And the podcast will return. Members will get the third part of my Orwell Line in the Unicorn read through with Alex and Grace. And for public freebie listeners, they'll be getting the first 2 parts of that this Saturday.
Sweet. Jamie's here. What's cooking, Jamie?
Hello. I have 3 things to plug today. First thing, this week on the Antifada, we spoke with Nick Estes of the podcast Red Nation about his book on Standing Rock, taking down all the racist statues, the connection between the fight for indigenous rights and the uprising for Black lives, and how to envision decolonization. That's out now for free for everyone. Highly recommend it. He's so smart and great. It's awesome. Also, tomorrow, my DSA caucus, Emerge, is putting on a teach-in with Mike Davis, great Marxist historian, on the rebellion for Black lives, the history of urban resistance, and the future of the U.S. left. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. I'll put a link to that in the blog. And then on Saturday, the Socialism Conference, Socialism 2020, is happening virtually. And I'm going to be on a panel called Socialist Organization and the Capitalist State at 2:30 p.m. with Eric Blanc. And it's going to be like a bit of a Socratic dialogue, I think, because we have things we agree on and we have things we disagree on. So check that out. I'm going to put a link to everything in the blog.
Cool. All right, folks. Check out the Nomiki show as well, of course, and we will see you in the on the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Hey, shut up. That's the most classic, iconic pieces of sound.
I think somebody needs to go into do a remix with more Daryl Perry into it, though. Because
really,
that is
Daryl Perry, poor Daryl Perry.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I think we should mine that resource for us.
Let's start off with something inspiring. When I interviewed President Lula along with the Brazil Wire back in January, definitely watch the interview, which you can on Michael Brooks Show YouTube if you haven't yet. I asked him, with his history before being president as a great labor organizer in Brazil, what would be the tactics to organize people in essentially the Uberized sector? And he said to me that this is one of his areas of deepest concern in Brazil and across the world. How labor action could take place, and how could bonds be built in such a ruthlessly atomized work environment? And he had some ideas about it. And I thought of that and was so moved because of these incredible demonstrations taking place from the food carriers strike in protest of low wages, of brutal work conditions that's taking place across Brazil. This is definitely one of those things that, when we talk about genuinely having global convergence, this should come to the United States. This is central to all of the problems and crises we face in the United States right now. And of course, echoes the amazing work of Chris Smalls and the Amazon strike. And I do want to note that, a lot of these companies, have jumped on board with what Cedric Johnson has called he's called it blackwashing, to sort of pretend to embrace and so on the uprisings that have happened the last several weeks. Remember the position these companies play in the economy, and remember their implications for all of our economic and social lives. Of course, first and foremost, the workers. So let's just play some of this footage from Brazil. This is in Sao Paulo, of these marching delivery men on their motorcycles. It's just awesome.
Sounds like cars are honking approvingly too, which is one of the best parts of getting out for the BLM protest.
Right. To have this in Brazil in the context of skyrocketing COVID cases, which of course Bolsonaro has been pushing on the population, constant threats of things like military coups, implications of things like military coups, and just complete political instability. This is extraordinary, and it really recenters the politics. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. This is what solidarity looks like. And a lot of these companies are global. So it would be really great and probably necessary to see international unions popping up of people who work for these companies all over the world, because they're fully globalized. The fight needs to be too. Also, this is going to be an increasingly important sector in which labor action needs to be happening as it becomes more and more of our economy, especially as more people are falling out of the shall we say, averagely employed, averagely paid sector, and captured by this hyper exploitative sector of gig work.
Yeah, and I would look into the work of Chuka Jacobin, who is a researcher and labor organizer in Canada. I've interviewed him a couple of times. He has a really good framework for global organizing. I mean, this is sort of funny. Obviously, the context is completely fucked up, but Ghislaine Maxwell was actually arrested today. I'm sorry. I'll put on the tinfoil. I think some of the I mean, already the firing of the Southern District head, Berman, was in and of itself an expression of a sort of Trump authoritarianism and Bill Barr's complete politicization of that process. I'm curious about the timing of all of these things. I'm very curious. Very curious.
It's an op until proven otherwise, is my take.
Indeed.
I mean, Bill Barr. Corey Pine had an interesting engagement with Tim Sharrock, who we've had on the show. And Corey's like, one question I'm still wondering is, did Barr take over handling Epstein from his dad? And Sharrock is like, that's a good question. If those two guys think it's a good question, I think it's a good question.
And people should know. I mean, that goes back to Bill Barr's dad hired Jeffrey Epstein to teach at Dalton Academy back in the late 70s. And Jeffrey Epstein had, no proper credentials for that.
And Bill Barr's dad being a veteran of the OAS, which is the CIA before the CIA was the CIA. So
indeed.
He's OG.
He's OG, as they say. So look, there's a lot of really important things here. And Alan Dershowitz is such a disgusting, grotesque mega scumbag that I sort of like, F him. But look, there's, in some ways, there's a convenient circling of a lot of people hating Alan Dershowitz. And so go after Alan Dershowitz. But there's a lot of people that might get caught up in this if anything like this goes forward.
Ghislaine Maxwell is in a lot of photos with a lot of people, which is not to mention Epstein himself.
A lot of people.
Look out. Do you think she's going to get Epsteined?
I would not be totally shocked.
I would not be shocked at all. I think everyone thought about that for Epstein. Everyone thought Epstein was going to get Epsteined, and then he got Epsteined.
And then the only kind of countervailing force was like, it's too obvious. I mean, look, we don't know what happens. Look, this is somebody, the reports have said for like a year that she's confident that she won't get into trouble because there's a lot of dirt and I think, again, I don't know if the dirt is just a network of evil people. I definitely think there's no doubt that there is an intelligence aspect to this. And you can look back at why he was let off with a slap in the wrist back in 2008. And the local prosecutor, of course, went on to become Trump's labor secretary, says, I was told Epstein was intelligence and to leave it alone. We don't know what, for who, whatever, but I'm sorry. There's obviously that component of this going on.
One thing we know intelligence services do is blackmail operations.
Indeed.
So
all that being said, this is a Vic Berger supercut of Alan Dershowitz sound bites about the Epstein relationship.
If you want to feel good, get a massage.
I don't like massages particularly.
I've had sex with one woman since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein. I have a perfect sex life.
I kept my underwear on during the massage.
I have a perfect sex life.
It's fucking terrible.
Also, this tweet's been going around. I don't know if you guys saw this.
It's so gross.
This has been going around regarding Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. This guy used to work for Southern District in New York.
Southern District just announced that the Ghislaine Maxwell case, like the original Epstein case, is staffed by the Public Corruption Unit. I worked at SDNY and did sex trafficking cases. They do not run out of public corruption unless there's a potential angle against the public official. Well, and of course, there's
obviously.
Yeah. I like
or against 100 public officials.
Yeah, against hundreds from every part of the earth.
Oh my God.
Well, we will see.
The whole thing is crazy.
The whole thing is crazy. Donald Trump is gonna try to recreate some of that magic from 2016. I think all of this kind of endless litigating about what kind of campaign that was, to me, gets just way too lost in sort of pedantry and the weeds. There's no doubt that in 2016, along with a sustained and vicious xenophobia, which he has implemented as president, that Trump was absolutely much more willing, in the main, not always, but in the main, to talk in a completely different way about a variety of economic issues, including, he not only talked about protecting Social Security and Medicare, he mocked Paul Ryan. He mocked Paul Ryan to the point where one of the stories that came out at the time was Paul Ryan telling the people behind closed doors, and this, of course, was true, like, don't listen to what this idiot says. We're going to roll the policy agenda out of Congress, and he's going to sign it. And, of course, that has mainly been true, along with all sorts of disastrous executive orders from the executive branch. So, of course, this is a pure oligarch, anti-worker Republican administration, regardless of the posturing. But the posturing in 2016 did matter, and it was part of the mix. There's no doubt about it.
That's part of how he won the primary
That's
that people like to ignore.
Definitely, without a doubt. And so he is in serious trouble, and he's going to try to recreate some of that magic. And in that sort of hilarious Trump way, he's going to choreograph it. Here he is on Fox Business News. Clip number 8.
Minimum wage, because today here in the District of Columbia, 3 other states as well, they are raising the minimum wage. The critics would say this is the wrong time to do that for businesses. Do you agree?
I'm going to have a statement on minimum wage. I feel differently than a lot of people on minimum wage, some people in my own party, but I'll have a statement over the next 2 weeks on minimum wage.
In terms of?
Well, I think I'm going to have a very positive statement on minimum wage. But look, I'm putting people to work at record numbers. I did it once. We had the greatest economy in the history of our country. Then we got hit with the China virus. It came in, and it came in rather quickly, and we put bans on China, did a lot of things right. I think we did it all right. We did a great job. We're credited with doing a great job, but
You're not credited with doing a great job. Read the Edward Luce piece in Financial Times. This guy was listening to Jared Kushner say that it would be bad for the stock market to move aggressively against this pandemic, which is skyrocketing, and it had its highest infection rate, 50,000 new cases yesterday, than we've had since the beginning of the outbreak in the United States. His leadership in this has been beyond disastrous. It actually can be properly called psychopathic. It's absolutely disgusting. And the asshole won't even wear a mask in Oklahoma. Now, it's very interesting on minimum wage, because minimum wage was actually something that he didn't necessarily try to pivot on when he ran in 2016. He pivoted on healthcare, on trade, and on preserving Social Security and Medicare. He didn't have much good to say about Medicare. About
he said it was too
wage.
low.
He said it was too high.
Or too high.
He said it was too high.
God will appeal to all those small business tyrants in his base.
I mean, I don't even think it's that. I think it's literally himself. I think it's his own perception as a person who has employed people. And I don't know what he's so worried about. There's a string of reports of him barely even paying people what he owed them anyways. But
I think he looks at it like, because he before he was running for president, he was fixated on like global competition with other countries. I think he sees American workers as literally getting too much money.
He sees them as, and that was also the other thing on trade that people, of course, in the mainstream media always miss, that Bernie Sanders was saying we should not have corporate written lobbyist guided trade agreements that lock in IP laws for pharmaceutical companies at the expense of public health, that might have a written in eco or worker provision, but have no enforcement mechanisms. The only serious enforcement mechanism is on behalf of corporations arguing against various pieces of domestic legislation. So we need to not write these trade agreements that disempower workers and are reckless about ecology anymore. And Donald Trump's critique of trade agreements was basically like, why would we have these international frameworks? Maybe the United States can just do aggressive bilaterals with developing countries, which will be completely vicious to them, and then also hopefully downgrade US standards even more. Like, let's even have a more accelerated race to the bottom than the already accelerated race to the bottom of the WTO framework, right? So that is, and that was already starting to show up in the Doha round several years ago, when developing countries actually flex their muscles a little bit at a trade round on things like ag subsidies. But all that being said, the political signal, I think his antenna is finally coming out a little bit, because he's been a complete disaster and failure. He's in a pandemic and depression. His response to the protests have disgusted a lot of people. And when he goes out and he does rally speeches, he just is, he's funny, he's a good performer, but it's all just Newsmax shit. And that's not appealing to anybody outside of everything, outside of people that he has already secured so much that they'll get COVID for him.
Yeah. I mean, certainly not now when so many people are suffering. And like, I think the influence of quote unquote white working class voters in 2016 has been somewhat overblown. Most of the people who voted for Trump were the people who always vote for Republicans no matter what. And they're richer on average than the people who vote for Democrats. But there was like a small but electorally significant slice of working class voters, mostly but not all white, that he got in 2016. And I don't think he's going to get them this time around. And I think he's starting to realize that. And that's why he's doing this.
Yeah, I think, as much of a jackass as he is, he can read a poll. So I'm gonna do another story here on Brazil. So obviously the Lula case meant a lot to me, but in general, the ongoing U.S. aggression towards various governments in Latin America, its undermining of the Caribbean. Look at a place like Haiti and U.S. foreign policy there. Just taking in the modern iterations, there's a 2004 U.S.-backed coup by the Bush administration against the Aristide and others. In 2011, you basically have Hillary Clinton pretty much telling the former Haitian leader René Préval, like, we're gonna accept the claims of the opposition and sort of handpick this guy. Sweet Mickey became president of Haiti in 2011, and his successor is the current president is his handpicked successor. And Sweet Mickey is kind of actually in some ways like the prototype of Trump. He was much more talented than Trump. He was a really popular singer, but he was a popular singer and performing artist who had close ties with the old military regime, and some people involved with Duvalier and drug trafficking and everything else. And he came back in 2010 or 2011, and ran this, anti-corruption, populist, but hard right sort of campaign.
That doesn't sound sweet at all.
There's definitely parallels between him and Trump. And there was also this really kind of embarrassing propaganda movie made because Praz of the Fugees worked on that campaign. Anyway, it's really interesting, really bizarre, but is inseparable from this example, the way COVID is hitting Haiti right now, and the fact that Haiti has just this completely colonized economy. I mean, they're barely even like a neo-colony. Anyways, it's very important to look at, and we see this with regards to Venezuela. There's ongoing and active efforts from the U.S. at a military coup there, but there's also the thing, this has been flown under the radar, but a couple of months ago, in fact, that very same Southern District of New York essentially put a bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head. putting out reward money, claiming that he was involved in drug trafficking. So you have to look at the role of lawfare and how legal instruments have been used and are used against the left, particularly as a tactic of the U.S. government in response to reversing the pink tide, really aggressively starting in 2008 and accelerating since then. And we've always known that in Brazil, there was clearly a U.S. role in the political prosecution of Lula, which paved the way for Bolsonaro as president, which paved the way for the corona crisis in Brazil, as an example. But it just keeps getting more and more spelled out, even from the Intercept leaks of a year ago. So I'm going to quote a little bit now from Brazil Wire. Brazil Wire, U.S. admits role in Operation Lava Jato and brags about Lula conviction. December 27, 2017, after U.S.-backed neoliberal Sebastian Piñera wins the Chilean presidential elections following corruption charges against center-left former Chilean President Michel Bachelet involving Brazilian construction company Odebrecht as part of the Lava Jato investigation, Al Clarin reveals that the U.S. State Department has publicly admitted its collaboration with the operations. The admission, something that Brazil Wire have suspected since the disclosure of State Department cables, which showed U.S. collaboration with Lava Jato judge/prosecutor Sergio Moro since 2009, was made by acting Assistant Attorney General Kenneth Blanco in his speech at the think tank, the Atlantic Council, in 2017. And it goes on to outline that relationship and the role it played in imprisoning Lula. And, you know, I've talked about this probably literally hundreds of times. So go look in the archives for MR and of TMBS to follow that case. But I still see, just like on a daily basis, I mean, people, it's not to say that heads of state, including left-wing heads of state, you know, corruption, human rights abuses exist everywhere, sure. But the level of credulity that still exists in U.S. media, which might make some sense if you're actually working at like a newspaper and you're cultivating national security state sources, but even just a lot of people who kind of consider themselves in the know or commentators have zero critical awareness. I mean, I remember when I first started talking about Lula, everybody's like, oh, but he's corrupt, without any understanding of either the political context of Brazil, no critical inquiry of what corruption even means functionally, no awareness of how the right wing has always weaponized the concept of corruption to attack the left, and zero awareness of a very aggressive U.S. role in modern history now in attacking center-left governments that have done so much for the poor in Latin America. And I hope that people can just, you know, read sources like Brazil Wire, just have a little bit of skepticism before they sort of uncritically embrace these narratives.
Mm-hmm. Wake up, sheeple.
I mean, it's incredible. It's like, I don't know how many, and even like there's some people who I've noticed, it's like they're very into like, hey, it happened, you know, the coup against Allende, you know, or actually it's a Patrice Lumumba's birthday yesterday or today, so we should honor him. Like the assassination of Lumumba, we can see all of these things in history, but they're also today. They're now.
It's easier when an academic press is published on them 20 years later for some people.
I mean, do you remember the amount of people that were just like, yeah, but Lula is corrupt. It's corrupt. Just
I don't, because my primary introduction to Lula was through you.
I mean, that's good. That's a good thing. We covered it well.
And not like some sort of CSIS panel on global corruption. Right.
Or even honest, or even, you know, a lot of, I think there was a lot of overindulgence in that narrative from some on the left as well. Speaking of which, check this out. A UK judge denies Nicolas Maduro's access to Venezuelan gold at the Bank of England. So top line alone, guys, does that sound like theft?
I'm going to say yes.
Matt, theft?
Oh, yeah. Free Maduro's cash.
Brendan, theft?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yes. UK judge denies Nicolas Maduro's access to Venezuelan gold at the Bank of England. It would be unlawful for Mr. Maduro to access the gold, the judge said, because the British government recognizes his rival, Juan Guaidó, as the country's leader. So we have an opposition figure who has declared himself leader in the same way that, I don't know, I'm the president of the United States. Or, okay, I'll make it more analogous. AOC has declared herself president of the United States. Or maybe Nancy Pelosi, although not really. It's not even analogous to that. He's tried to lead multiple coups, all of which have failed, even with endless U.S. backing, endless backing of the UK, endless backing of almost all Western powers, as well as, to greater or lesser extent, Colombia and Brazil. Failed. And now, as part of an unending economic warfare on a sovereign country, you can criticize it whatever you want, but a sovereign country that has been subject to endless sanctions, to endless coup attempts, starting, we know of at least in 2002, move against Chavez. This judge just says, $1 billion, that's yours. You can't have it because we're trying to organize a coup against you and you haven't acquiesced to it. And that's, again, this is another example that this is reported as normal. You can have any opinion you want on Maduro. You can have any opinion you want on how Venezuela has gone. I would note most of the opinions I see are just sort of embarrassingly uninformed. But as always with these cases, it doesn't depend on painting some perfect rosy scenario, not acknowledging and seeing obvious mistakes. But if you can't see the overall political context of the relentless warfare that has taken place decades, politically, economically, and militarily to some extent against Venezuela, you're delusional.
Yeah.
U.S. political consultants, the media monopolies, which actually there was parallels in the warfare against the Workers' Party in Brazil. I mean, one of the big takeaways is that Brazil and PT had an extraordinary respect for democracy. And that was part of the reason, terribly, because we should respect and support that. I certainly do, that they were able to be so viciously undermined. But this just on its face, before you get to anything else, is theft. That's a theft. This is their money.
Yeah, people wonder why, quote unquote, like actually existing socialist countries have so many economic issues when other countries are literally allowed to seize their wealth and put them under siege in all sorts of ways via both hard power and soft power, right? This is also why we need a real movement for democratic socialism right here in the imperial core, because anything that anyone tries to do anywhere else in the world, any attempts at any steps towards socialism, the core is going to come back and fuck you up as long as it exists in the way that it does now.
Well, and it's also important on a discourse level. Like, you know, this idea that, well, you know, why can't Venezuela, or why can't, you know, Michael Manley in Jamaica in the 70s, or Venezuela today? Or again, what happens when you do have a government like the PT that radically cuts poverty and also respects democratic norms and makes necessary political trade-offs? They're still politically targeted by the US and by the elite. And then in all of these other places that people are always going on about, like, oh, why can't it be done in a democratic manner and all of this stuff? And it's like, why can't it be, you know, why can't Venezuela be like France or Sweden? Well, here's why. And again, it's not, I know a lot of morons will see that as a justification of every policy that a place like Venezuela might implement. But if you don't see the context of political warfare against a developing country trying to set its own policies, again, you're just delusional. You don't see how the world works.
And guess what? The Imperial Court does not give them any extra brownie points for respecting democratic norms, believe it or not.
That's very clear in the Brazil case and countless others. All right, let's do some more sound. Let's see here. Jesus. There's so much. We are really on the right wing beat here. Okay. Donald Trump. Corona cases are skyrocketing. 50,000 new infections yesterday. We might get up to 100,000 a day. The states that forced reopens, Texas, Florida, disaster, getting worse again in California, predicted resurgences in the fall and winter. What does Donald Trump have to say about all that?
Retail sales are at a record number, especially when you talk about increase. When you look at percentage increase, nobody's ever seen anything like it. So we're headed back in a very strong fashion with a V. And I think we're going to be very good with the coronavirus. I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear, I hope.
You still believe so? Disappear?
Well, I do. Yeah, sure, at some point. And I think we're going to have a vaccine very soon, too.
I'm back to magical thinking. They will try to put out a vaccine as an October surprise. And who could possibly, I mean, look, we'll see how it's wheeled out. The timeline doesn't make sense, but I am very confident that Trump will put out an October surprise. We have a vaccine that will probably be another completely unsafe home treatment.
No, it's just going to be like saline solution with his face on it.
Exactly.
If we're lucky.
It's this thing called Windex, and we had no idea. It's unbelievable. And it just happens to work incredibly well. And it's going to lead us to another V. I'm just going to read here from the New York Times. Nearly 50 new coronavirus cases, another single-day record. The United States has reported 49,332 new coronavirus cases on Wednesday, the fifth single-day case record in 8 days, according to the New York Times database. North Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas are hitting daily records, with Texas reaching more than 8,000 new infections. As new cases rise, states and localities have reversed course on reopening. New York City decided to not let its restaurants resume indoor service next week as originally planned. Miami Beach said it would reinstate a nightly curfew beginning Thursday at 12:30 a.m., extending till 5 a.m. to try to curb the spread. And California shut down bars and halted indoor dining at restaurants in 19 counties that are home to more than 70% of the state's population. So that's where we are.
Seems bad. I don't know.
It seems you don't see the V coming?
Call me pessimistic, but not at this moment, no.
Well, you would make a terrible press secretary for the president because Kayleigh McEnany sees it. And she also knows who's going to cut through all the bureaucratic tape that's stopping it.
Coronavirus. Earlier today, the president said, I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear, I hope. Is hoping that it will disappear the president's strategy at this point?
No, the president's confident that it'll disappear. He's confident that he's put together a revolutionary, first-class team that is going to break through bureaucracy and get us a vaccine. He's confident that that will lead us to a place where we won't have COVID on our hands. And in fact, there was very pleasing news today from Pfizer and BioNTech that showed positive results for their vaccines.
Dr. Fauci says that we're heading toward 100,000 cases per day. But so why does the president have evidence that it would just disappear?
Well,
we distinguish between a vaccine and it just disappearing.
One thing I would note with regard to cases, we're aware that there are embers in the country. We're aware that there are places with rising cases, and that's why Dr. Birx is on the ground and others. We're continually assessing that. But one thing I would note is just that when you do test more people, you do identify more cases, and that is rapidly ongoing. We're testing more than 500,000 a day.
She said the thing. She said the Trump thing. I thought he was just joking. Like, I can't keep the story straight.
I thought he was just joking, and it seems like she's saying the Trump thing in the totally wrong direction. Because she's saying we are doing more tests, but that's going to F up the numbers. Maybe she's not so good at this job.
Like, did she not just say that the cases are only going up because the tests are going up?
Yes.
On another point here, to say that like cutting bureaucratic red tape has led to like, you know, innovation and helping solve this crisis, you can just like do a simple Google search of like FEMA contracts that have been handed out that have absolutely derailed and hampered this entire process of testing and everything. For example, there was a contract handed out for testing tubes that ended up just being unusable mini soda bottles. So, you know, innovation, I suppose.
Wow.
That's that deep, deep innovative process that only the market can bring.
Yeah, that only a nephew or a cousin can bring.
Right. Say, my Jared's cousin has some used Coke bottles he'd like to do something with.
Joshua has a lot of mini Coke bottles that they don't that were defective.
And then he realized he had all these Dr. Peppers. He doesn't like them anymore. So he wants to pour them out and then use them as tests for COVID. Let's give him a subsidy. And of course, again, CNBC, official U.S. coronavirus death toll is a substantial undercount of tally, Yale study finds. The number of confirmed U.S. deaths due to the coronavirus is substantially lower than true tally, according to a study published Wednesday in the JAMA Eternal Medicine. Using National Center for Health Statistics data, research at Yale University compared the number of excess U.S. deaths, that's an interesting phrase, from any causes with the reported number of weekly COVID deaths from March 1st through May 30th. The numbers were then compared with deaths from the same period in previous years. Researchers found that the excess number of deaths over normal levels exceeded those attributed to COVID-19, leading them to conclude that many of the fatalities were likely caused by coronavirus, but not confirmed. State reporting discrepancies and a sharp increase in U.S. deaths amid a pandemic suggests the number of COVID-19 fatalities is undercounted, they said. Our analysis suggests that the official tally of deaths due to COVID-19 represents a substantial undercount of the true burden. Dan Weinberger, an epidemiologist at Yale School of Public Health and lead author of the study, told CNBC. Weinberger said that other factors could contribute to an increase in deaths, such as people avoiding emergency treatments for things like heart attacks. However, he doesn't think that that is the main driver. And this study was supported by the National Institutes of Health. So the bottom line is that there is no way that we are properly accounting the full death toll of this. And the full death toll that rests on a political level, first and foremost, with the absolutely reckless, grotesque response of the Trump administration, with New York, thousands due to Governor Cuomo, and a global mishandling of this. But in the United States, obviously the blame starts and ends with Trump, and there is a hell of a lot of blame. And we don't even know the full rates here. Clearly we don't. Brian Kilmeade has an alternative source of who to blame. What's going on with Brian Kilmeade? What is that old phrase? He has like a bee in his bonnet.
Well, Kilmeade doesn't have the detachment of a lot of the Fox News people who are just kind of doing this for the cash. Kilmeade's a true believer.
Kilmeade didn't get the electroshock therapy when he signed his contract. He renewed.
That's what it is. There's a bizarre sincerity with him.
Yeah, the sincerity of like a Long Island car salesman, basically.
Yeah, it's
like
ridiculous.
Glenn Ross.
Which is more than everyone else on Fox News.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kayleigh McEnany might be relatively. I mean, she seems to get genuinely upset when she's talking about her her friend's chicken salad business or whatever.
You mean
But
Ainsley Earhart? Are you confusing
Yes.
Kaylee McEnany with Ainsley Earhart?
100%. I just did that.
Ainsley Airhead.
You think
Ashley Ainsley.
all blonde white women look alike?
Yes, and I will probably consider it and continue to make that mistake without shame or regret.
You don't not need to tell the difference between Fox News blondes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, really here? I mean, look, in the global scheme of things, no, they don't. Fox News and Trump press secretary, yes.
There is a photo of them two online if someone wants to find it, of them wearing on a box panel interview where they're both wearing red dresses on the same day, and it's hilarious.
Here's Brian
Stepford
Kilmeade.
Wives.
Here's Brian Kilmeade on the rise of COVID and mixed messages.
The thing is, keep in mind, if you were confused about masks, yeah, we should wear them now. But we were told in March, and April, don't really work. Don't worry about it. When Anthony Fauci was asked about it, he said, do I wear a mask? Well, I don't go out much. So now all of a sudden, we're terrible people if we're slow to get on the mask train. Now you want to wear a mask? Okay. But don't vilify people that are slow to do it, because we were getting a lot of mixed messages. And it wasn't just from the president. It was from our lauded scientists that weren't on the same page, including our Surgeon General, who told us it didn't work.
Because at that point, we have now heard they didn't have enough masks.
But that's no problem. We were supposed to make our own. We had cloth. We had socks. We had T-shirts we could have used. All you had to say is masks work, but don't use the medical mask. We can understand that as a country.
Okay. You sanitize.
So you know what's interesting about this to me, though, is I don't want to just do the sort of standard F Kilmeade here, though that's really easy. It is true. There was a completely contradictory message on masks. And in fact, when this first started, we have to acknowledge the range in which this has been politicized. When this first started, the first people that were talking about this were actual public health people that everybody always ignores. And then the right that wanted to use this as part of escalating tensions and starting a Cold War and fear-mongering and generally spreading racism about China and Chinese people. And there was an interesting sort of knee-jerk response amongst some, I remember in the very beginning, there was this kind of some people that defined themselves in the center against rightly rejecting the racism of Bannon, but then also kind of implying that this wasn't going to be a thing. That was definitely happening in the very beginning. And then with the masks, what gets always lost here is that, of course, they weren't going to recommend people wear masks in the beginning because there weren't any. There was a production problem. So clearly, even though obviously it was a good idea, there wasn't the capacity to give that public health advice because the production wasn't in place for that. So there has been contradictory messages. Now it's pure disastrous death cult Republican Party cultural politics. And it's jeopardizing people's lives every day. And we do have the resource for people to have masks. And we see all these disgusting, embarrassing videos of people throwing tantrums and refusing to wear them. So there's no contradiction now, but actually the overall arc of this, there was a lot of contradiction. The contradiction goes to the fact that you cannot have clean, clear scientific advice when you don't have the supply chain in order to back up that advice. At least that's my interpretation.
Yeah. The tantrums, however, are not about the mixed messages at this point.
They are not about the mixed messages at this point. That is correct.
I like the idea of I don't know, I got mixed messages. A lot of people were saying the masks aren't that useful. So I was confused, guys. He's the fucking president. That can fly for some schmo that barely pays attention to stuff. He's the president. He's making these choices based on cultural signification purposes. Yeah.
That's right. Let's see. What else to get to? All right. I've been submitting and just doing a lot more Dave Rubin stuff. I'm kind of burned out on it, but it still makes people laugh a lot. Did anybody
He's had a renaissance or a resurgence lately.
He's having a little bit of a resurgence.
He's got a new book, right?
Well,
this book's been out for a while.
It's kind of an old book, but
yeah,
he talks about
Newly
it like
published.
it's new.
Yeah, it's new to a lot of it'd be new to a lot of Joe Rogan's audience. I know that.
Yeah. So, how many of you took seriously the idea that Dave Rubin would move to Texas because he was so fed up with California? How many people took that seriously?
I don't think anybody on this show.
I don't think anybody took that seriously. So there's been a handful of, Rush. Yeah, I think Rush relocated from New York to Florida, and Glenn Beck did make his way to Texas. But there are endless numbers of these, and I'm sure they have all sorts of tax arrangements where they establish residency elsewhere. But there's a lot of these right-wing types that are constantly bitching about New York and California, and they don't leave. I'm
because
sure
they're bougie assholes and they like it here.
Exactly. And the idea of Dave Rubin going to Texas never struck me as plausible. And now it is or any of us is plausible. And now in his put up or shut up moment, Dave Rubin has got some news for the state of California. He's not going anywhere. He's staying and fighting.
I think that the decision is that we're going to fight it out here, at least for a couple of years. I don't want to give up on California. I mean that sort of at the personal level of I'm not a quitter. And I meet too many people. I'm meeting people on the streets right now. I'm telling you, I'm meeting people on my street who are coming up to me going, Dave, I've been a lefty my whole life. This place is out of control now. Maybe we have to do something. I'm getting a lot of messages from people that want to figure out how to fix it here. You know, California was not always a progressive dystopia. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. Okay, he was more lefty at the time, but like the point is that there is a chance that some of this stuff could be reset. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a Republican governor of California not too long ago. So I think there is a chance. So I want to stay and fight for a couple of years. I really do. I don't want to flee. I also think that beyond me, it's like the message that I would be sending to people. I talk about the foot vote all the time. If you don't like what's happening in your state, you got to go to another state. But, if all of the good people leave California, go to Texas, well, first off, we know what happens. These blue people go to red states and then they turn them blue. So if I was you, Texas, I'd be building a wall and not letting any Californians in.
Man, he is desperate for excuses to not just move to Texas. Jesus Christ.
And since when is he just a simple Republican partisan? When did he switch to that from trying to be like, I'm a classical liberal?
I don't know. What was it like the last couple of
I
months?
think the Blaze move really was him giving up. I mean, I love the idea that Ronald Reagan was a lefty governor of fucking California. He was more of a lefty then. He said Reagan.
Oh yeah, Ray.
That's after he ran against Goldwater and basically thought Goldwater was too much of a squish.
Well, Reagan ran California in a way that actually would fit, which is that, well, not on taxes. He did raise taxes, so that would be complete no. He was pro-choice at the time. He signed abortion access into law when he was governor, and then a lot of his time was preoccupied with secret task forces to literally wage war on the Black Panthers student movements. So no, I actually could see it fitting.
I really like the idea of Dave's neighbors coming up to him, be like, we need real, classical liberal leadership. We need you to take on the opposition. It's like, well, if someone's got to do it, I'll fight here at the Alamo, California.
It's like Dave, the guy at Dave's juice bar who doesn't want to miss the steady business. He's just man, it's out of fucking control. You want another acai berry juice? You don't want to leave.
I'm having a wonderful day.
I'm having a great day, and I think I want to fight it out here.
Some other guy who owns sitcom distribution rights to Everybody Loves Raymond in fucking Czech or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Just saying there's tyranny in California.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger, I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger could never be a Republican today, ironically. Like, he was not by any stretch a good governor from my perspective, because he was, you know, there was some war on the unions, there was some austerity, you know, embraced the death penalty. But the guy also implemented a gas tax and was totally in line with sort of the California version of green policies, which absolutely don't have a justice component, but that's a pretty bipartisan affair. So, I mean, like Schwarzenegger is not, and Schwarzenegger's main contribution to public now is telling everybody to like wear a mask, and that like it's manly to take coronavirus seriously. So like even that one, yeah, total cuck. I mean, I don't know. Dave, just the endless floundering.
I bet he's real easy to upsell on additions to a smoothie, though.
Totally.
I also think like I think there was, you know, we'd stop paying attention so much, but I think now kind of juicing it a bit more, we might be able to get him to get into levels of bitterness toward his former IDW pals that maybe replaced him. You will not replace me, Eric.
You will not replace me. You will not replace me.
It starts to feel kind of mean at a certain point in time, dumping on someone who's such a loser, but I don't care.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I don't know. That clip we played on TMBS of him talking about the Rogan booking made me genuinely uncomfortable.
Like, he does it to himself. Like, why would you tell people that?
Because you're desperate and you want to, like, so honestly, like, because we played a clip earlier of him saying, like, a lot of my lefty friends don't really talk to him anymore. And I'd assume that was the Weinsteins or Sam Harris. But
no, I think he probably means Rogan.
He meant Rogan.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people besides my juice salesman don't talk to me. All right, this is getting depressing.
Yeah. Dave needs to remain a character and not like a human being.
Yeah,
person
exactly. I mean, wait a second. People are asking why I haven't moved to Texas yet. Oh no. What if I say that we're going to stay here and fight it out?
I mean, I used to think I could just hang out with Adam Carolla, but he always just talks about how cool Dennis Prager is all the time.
He smells like sangria, mangria.
He doesn't want to hang out with me anymore. And Dennis told me that I'm already the gay guy in the video, and that's it.
Well, Dennis is
and Ben said even if he embraced gay marriage, he still wouldn't come to my anniversary.
Well, we know Prager wanted Rubin to keep up the crypto liberal or crypto.
Right.
And now that that's out the window, he's probably losing it with Prager, too. I don't know if he's got any cigars in a while.
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, what's the point of moving to
Dennis
Texas?
Prager told him to his face
why he's valuable.
That the only reason he's valuable is because he's a gay man who claims to be a liberal. He said that to him like multiple times to his face. I mean, the brand proposition is failing.
Maybe if enough of his friends on the right bully him enough, he'll try and pivot back.
Actually, I have that video. We could just...
All right, this video is funny. Let's play. Why not? Why not?
Okay, here we go.
I want you to continue to say you're a liberal because you're of great use to good values.
Well, don't worry, I'm not doing it for your use of me. I'm doing it for myself.
No. It's like Christians who say to me, we would love you to come to Christ, but you are so valuable to us as a Jew when you defend us Christians. Yeah. And they're right. You are valuable in the best sense of the word. You are.
Oh my God.
Wow.
See, I don't know what's wrong with me, but it's just not funny. It's just like, Jesus Christ.
He's inserted too much of himself into it as like a tragic character for it to be funny.
Oh, no, it's so funny.
He literally goes, Dave's doing his little like, well, I mean, I'm obviously not doing it for you. This is a genuine, deeply felt conviction. Yeah, I get all that shit.
Yeah.
Anyways, what the big value of you is that you're a hobo and you say you're a liberal.
Yeah.
Listen up, you dope.
He's lucky that the winds haven't shifted yet, because he would absolutely go to conversion therapy if he felt that's what he needed to do to keep ingratiating himself with these people.
I mean, he's on the Glenn Beck network. I don't know. I don't discount anything.
It's a shame though, because he didn't get the invite to Persuasion. So
no, that is not. Persuasion is a much more upmarket proposition. All right, and actually, let me just loop to this. Trump administration scales back mandate that health insurers cover COVID tests. TPM. As the pandemic worsens around the country, the Trump administration has moved to place limits on insurers who are required limits on who insurers are required to cover in COVID-19 tests. The Trump administration made the move in a little-noted guidance sheet released June 23rd by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. CMS said the insurers no longer have to cover COVID-19 testing when employers mandate a test before employees can return to work, or when someone is tested as part of public health surveillance program. And I just want to say, notice how, yes, McEnany has echoed what Trump has been saying very transparently. I mean, he's been saying, like, look, I'm not too into having a lot of tests because it increases the numbers. She said the same thing as part of some nonsense spin about how we have a great test program in place, and that's why the numbers are going up, and so that's a reflection of our competence. Obviously, that's ludicrous. The actual policy moves that the administration is to scale back tests. Like, not only is he not joking, that's the policy move.
I mean, I remember at the beginning when tests were so slow, it was one of the first problems. And, you know, everyone thought like maybe there was some petty corruption, personal corruption angle to it. But it was because what you don't know can't hurt you. That's how, like, they're avoiding that, right? Like, that's why they want to avoid knowing. I mean, it's climate denial, but just made on a more acute time span, basically. And it's happening in front of your eyes. But I don't think there's no like new mendacity here by the Republicans. It's nothing they haven't been doing about things like climate change or, I mean, racism or whatever you want to call it. But now it's just like the effects of the deaths stack up to the point where you see them in, you know, refrigerated trucks.
Yeah, and let's not limit it to just the Republicans as well. The insurance and healthcare industries are absolutely going to just make you pay every cent of every visit you take to the hospital in case of like COVID or something like that. People are already getting billed for like chest x-rays and, you know, billed for tests that are COVID tests that they're, you know, itemizing as something that isn't a COVID test. This is happening anecdotally all across, you know, my
and Gilead raised prices. I'm sure that that was covered on this show. I mean, Gilead,
the Gilead prices.
Gilead, yeah. So I mean, of course, and they know that it's always a win-win for insurance and HMOs because they can squeeze individual consumers with complete impunity, and the worst case, they'll just keep getting bailed out. They'll get bailed out. Like if there is actually a critical mass of people who can't pay them back, or, you know, I mean, that's fine. They'll just put tens of millions of people in collection and garnish their wages if there is any, or maybe garnish their stimulus checks if there is another round. We already know that happened with the last round, not necessarily with insurance, but other financial services. They know that, you know, if it becomes a structural problem for them as an industry, there is no doubt that there is a bipartisan basis to give them a full bailout in Congress, without a doubt. So it's all upside for the health insurance industry. I mean, it's just the idea that you would have any question about why you need single payer. I just can't even compute how delusional that is, unless you are literally a CEO of a Cigna or something. Like it's insane. And it's it's dangerous, and it's entirely parasitic.
Yeah, what's going on in the electoral sphere right now is operating at so many layers removed from normal people's lives that it's insane. And like,
Definitely.
I hope that people don't give up. Like, no matter who's president, this is going to be a huge fight, and we should be protesting outside the houses of big pharma execs. We should be, doing direct actions in Washington at the same time that we're still taking action around all of these other crises because they're all connected.
This is interesting. Mother Jones is reporting that Democrats want to take the fate of unemployment out of Mitch McConnell's hands. A temporary enhancement to unemployment benefits are set to sunset at the end of July. Senate Democrats are proposing a permanent extension, one that would automatically adjust with changing economic conditions, a changing leftward shift among the party's leadership as it navigates the country's economic recovery to face the pandemic. The proposal, which came from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Juan Wyden of Oregon, would continue the current $600 per week boost to unemployment benefits to states until a state's 3-month average total unemployment rate falls below 11%. The enhanced benefit would then increase by 100 for every percentage point decrease in the unemployment rate. For example, while the rate is above 10%, the boost would be 500. If the rate is above 9%, the boost would be 400. States would resume their pre-COVID-19 once the unemployment rate falls below 6%. So look, I have mixed feelings about this, and I don't want to be too critical of it because absolutely it's a good proposal given where we're at, and it would help a lot of people. So that's the most important thing. The thing is, though, you in what army right now? I mean, if they effectively nationalize it and they're going to have to simplify it, if they're going to go out and campaign on it, please, my God, don't talk about the corresponding drop with the different rates of unemployment. Just say, we're trying to make this unemployment extension permanent and automatic, something more analogous to food stamps, if I'm reading it correctly, which is just a sort of automatic kick in. And they should be fighting on drastically increasing food stamps as well, by the way. If they make it simple, it could be a very effective thing to campaign on nationally against not only Trump, but all Republicans, because they will oppose this. The problem I have with it tactically is they will pass something else because Republican senators are in trouble because Donald Trump is in trouble, but Mitch McConnell is still the master of the Senate. He still controls the process entirely. So the first thing is that it's very likely not to be this generous. And also, again, this expansion is a huge credit to Bernie Sanders. This is the most tangible thing that helped real people. That's because of Bernie's important activity during the CARES Act. But the bottom line trade-off was immediate alleviation of suffering to some extent, not nearly enough, because of course we need rent freezes, rent forgiveness, rent moratoriums. We needed those $2,000 a month checks for everybody, like Rashida Tlaib was working along again with Sanders. But there was some immediate relief in these unemployment checks, of course. And then the trade-off was that over 90%, 95% of the bill was just the structural consolidation of monopoly capitalism in this country and another massive infusion through the Treasury and the Fed with no job guarantees and labor protections for the most powerful corporations in the country. So, I want to see what the corresponding work on corporate issues are from the Senate Democrats. I suspect there'll be very little, although there'll be, this and that proposal from people like Sanders. And this gets wonky when it needs to be really simple in terms of messaging. And, we'll see. We'll see how much can be clawed out in negotiation with McConnell. But that's not all bad. I have to give a critical analysis, but I'm glad to see them finally pushing something that's relatively beneficial and simple.
Yeah, sure. But we have not seen the bottom of this crisis yet. And the kinds of measures that will need to be taken to actually make a difference, I just think they're out of the scope of the Democratic Party's ideology and abilities. But, I want to be hopeful. The level of international coordination that it's going to require to really beat this thing back is also, I don't see it happening. But, pressure makes diamonds. So a girl could dream.
We'll see. We shall see. All right. let's do one final piece of sound, or actually, we'll do two. We'll do something. We'll do something funny to end. This is footage from Fort Lauderdale, and the police have been proving again and again and again in their responses to so many places why there really is an urgent need for all of these policy steps that people have been talking about. And this is just a Fort Lauderdale police officer. It's basically bragging about firing on protesters.
We can play the footage of them, firing as well.
Yeah, let's play both pieces of this footage. So they're shooting rubber bullets, throwing tear gas at protesters, and then they're checking to make sure their videos are off and laughing about it, which is going to be very counter to their public claim that they were in danger or some other bullshit.
Why are cops able to turn their cameras off?
That defeats the whole point of the camera, no?
Maybe originally when body cams were coming out, there was some sort of storage limitation that maybe you couldn't record all the time that they were out on the job and you needed to just do it for interactions or whatever. I'm just spitballing here, but that's definitely not the case now. You could easily record everything those guys do every second they're on the clock, and that should be mandated by law.
Listen. I've got a reform plan. You can only turn off your body cam with your supervisor's fingerprint, and that's going to be able to solve the problem.
That's actually a fun. At least we'd have somebody to couldn't displace responsibility from those guys anymore. Yeah.
Let's all right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You want to talk about how this institution is rotten to the core. They cannot even carry out. They will not even carry out reforms that are totally toothless and don't actually do anything, like body cameras. So good luck expecting them to carry out any kind of significant ones.
It's still shocking to see that footage as well. It really does just look like a fucking war scene.
It's Call of Duty.
They're treating it like a video game.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, that's what he said in that clip, basically.
Yeah.
Let's do the final piece of sound today. This is who is this guy from TPUSA?
He's just a new hack.
Okay, he's a new hack. He's on Fox and Friends, and he's going to just blame the reason that people are afraid of the police, Black Americans in particular, is because celebrities are telling them to be afraid.
This is the next guy that Dave Chappelle's going to go after instead of Candace Owens.
Yes.
I don't think he'll get that far, but maybe.
No.
Of you are watching this for the first time, and I definitely wanted to share it. A dad posted this video of his son. He's playing basketball, right? And a cop car comes by, and he quickly ducks behind the car, hiding from the police as he comes past. And he later would say, I was afraid that he was going to come by and choke me like he did George Floyd, and then went back to playing. So that's a kid with his perception of police. What do you take away from this?
Yeah. I think it's heartbreaking, Brian. It really is heartbreaking. And I think that the reason why there is this idea that police officers are sort of on the attack, kind of like hunting black men on the attack to kill black men, it's something that's really being perpetuated by mass media right now. We've got celebrities, entertainers, pop culture, all of that stuff permeates the media. And it sends this message that is not the right message to African Americans, that their lives are somehow in danger whenever they have have a police interaction or whenever they see police officers around. It's really unfortunate. And I think the way, Brian, that we combat this is providing positive examples of police officers, but also we have to start highlighting the millions of African-American police officers that are out there protecting their streets and their cities every single day. I think that we too often get bogged down in this narrative that all police officers are white and all criminals or all victims of police brutality are black. Okay. And we really have to
all right. I let me just say this, first of all, that if you want to look at this stuff through a class lens, there are numbers for that too. That if you look at where there are police encounters and fatalities, it is minuscule in neighborhoods, less than 10% neighborhoods with a median average of income of over $100,000 a year. And that the massive and vicious racial disparities in policing, which I'm going to talk about in a second, is not only backed up by endless pieces of data, it does tend to be concentrated in geographic centers like Chicago and New York and so on. And in addition to that, there is proportionally some of the highest states with police fatalities in terms of encounters include New Mexico, Oklahoma, Alaska. And I just want to make this point because the main job he's doing there is this disgusting infantilizing of Black people and the fear of policing, which is there is just sort of endless abundance of reason for, and you can look at the data and just talk to basically anyone. But also that when they point out that there are cases that it is not just like a strict one-to-one, that there's police who happen to come from Black or Hispanic backgrounds who engage in brutality, and there's also white victims of police brutality. The answer is like, yes, exactly. So don't you want to take on this issue as well? Isn't this clearly signs of a very big problem that implicates class, geography, and race?
And guns also,
and police with guns, and the training methodologies, and what they're incentivized to do. I mean, there is this horrifying, evil video that came out a couple of years ago of, I think, a man. I'm assuming he was having some type of sort of mental episode. It was a white man. They're telling him to crawl towards the police. They're holding guns on him, and they're telling him to crawl, and then they murder him. And they're laughing while they do it. Now, every time there is a new uprising, some right-wing asshole points out, uses this and goes, well, see? And so the answer is, okay, yes, sure, see. So shouldn't you be out on the streets too? Shouldn't you be urgently concerned about this as well? You're making the joke of a murder video just to justify the police harassment of Black people. And just really quick, this is from the Washington Post. Stop and frisk data, for example, consistently shows about 3% of these encounters produce any evidence of crime. So 90% of people are getting punished slowly because they belong to a group. New York Times examination after the death of George Floyd found that Black people make up 19% of the Minneapolis population, 9% of its police, and they were on the receiving end of 58% of the city's police use of force incidents. A massive study published in May 2020, 95 million traffic stops by 56 police agencies between 2011 and 2018 found that Black people were much more likely to be pulled over than whites. The disparity lessens at night when the police are less able to distinguish based on the race of the driver. It goes on and on and on. And you can look at those class-based statistics as well. There's a great piece by Adolph Reed in Non-Site. So this is just disgusting, infantilizing, and what you would expect from TPUSA and Fox News.
Yeah. Well, they're doing what the right always does, which is to say, saying it's the ones who are calling attention to racism who are the real racists, right? And they're getting people all upset about problems that don't exist when we all know that, the problems do exist. Also, like you're saying, it's not only a Black issue, it is disproportionately and oftentimes a Black issue, but, working class white people are killed as well by the cops. But like even on a grander level than that, it's an issue that affects everyone, right? Because white supremacy is a tool of capitalist domination and exploitation. And if we ever want to get working class power in this country, we have to fight racism. We have to fight all of the ideologies that divide the working class and keep them separate. And not to mention, the police are they're an instrument of class rule. They arose to catch runaway slaves. They arose to break strikes. And every person who wants liberation for themselves and for others should care about this issue.
Word. And I also just want to plug, as always, Cedric Johnson's talk, Policing Beyond the Technical Fix, which is really, really good in-depth look at all of this stuff. Thanks, everybody. Great job, as always. Sam's here tomorrow. We're on vacation next week. Check out all of our shows. Stay safe. Be well. Take care, everyone.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my power